So, um, things are getting more confusing and messier in terms of the plot. This is a bit of a shorter section of the book, so I doubt this video will be as long as the last one. Um, and I'm sort of wondering where to start here. I guess before I get to the messy and confusing elements of the plot, uh, which I say in a good way, by the way. I don't think there's anything actually being mishandled here. I think it's actually very well written. Very well written confusion, and very much on purpose. Um, but before I get to that, I want to talk about the start of this section, because this act of this book probably opens with the most metal scene I've ever seen in a work of fiction. Harrow murders a planet with a sword, and then she submerges herself into the afterlife to chase the ghost of the planet and kill it with harpoons made from her own bones. Um, this book can be very sort of high concept a lot of the time, and very happening almost entirely inside characters' heads, and very philosophical and very psychological. But it pays to remember that it is also, as far as I can tell, a setting created entirely based on pure rule of cool. Like, Tamsin Muir just had a bunch of really metal ideas and created a setting that would allow those ideas to happen, is the only way I could explain this, because holy shit, this scene had some Doom soundtrack playing in the background while I was reading it. Just just wanted to start by saying that. The rest of this section, however, is kind of the opposite of this chapter, in that almost nothing actually happens. Weirdly enough, most of this section of the book is actually just various assorted flashbacks. It's kind of an interesting way to tell a story, because the narration, the temporal placement of the narration is after the chapter where Harrow murders a planet. But most of the events being narrated during this section happened during the previous 3 months. And they're just being narrated, like, in hindsight, from the perspective of where the narration is placed, which is after the planet murder, if that makes sense. It's an odd way to write this particular section of the book, but I do like it, in part because I think it works to sort of complement the break from reality that Harrow herself is experiencing. It feels like Tamsin Muir is trying to sort of simulate to us as the readers this, like, disjointed, chaotic, non-linear way in which Harrow herself is moving through this story. Where sometimes she doesn't know how she got here. She doesn't know what the previous thing that happened is. She just knows what's happening right now, and then later on she'll remember the previous thing and stuff like that. It works, and so far I've been able to keep up, with a handful of exceptions. I'll talk about one at the end of this that I'm really confused by, and I'm hoping maybe someone who's read the book can explain if this is a mistake or if I'm supposed to be confused by it, but I'll get to that. But first, let's talk about some of the plot threads being woven through here. So, we are slowly piecing together and learning more about John, the Emperor, mostly indirectly, but also from him. He mentions here a terrorist group who are called the something of Eden? I can't remember what they're called. The something of Eden. The blood of Eden. The blood of Eden. And John says that, I believe John says that Eden is someone that the blood of Eden abandoned or something like that. My first thought was that Eden is the body in the tomb on the ninth house. Plain. My apologies. Okay. But then, later on, we get this exchange between Mercymorn and Augustine, where Augustine accuses Mercymorn of trying to be John's new replacement AL. And then he says that AL was John's, I believe, bodyguard, which makes me think that AL might have been John's cavalier, and that he became what he is now by basically just doing something similar to the electoral process, but probably more advanced, and sacrificing whoever AL was. Which makes me then ask the secondary question of, is AL the body? Is AL the one in the locked tomb? And is AL... Well, so later on in this section, John sings or recites the poem Annabel Lee to Harrow, which is a real poem, and I'll get to the implications of that in a moment. But he recites the poem Annabel Lee to her, and now I'm wondering, is RAL even the real initials of this supposed person? Or does AL merely stand for Annabel Lee as a sort of metaphorical Annabel Lee in John's life? Like a lost love. I don't know. There's a lot going on and so little information so far. But yeah, about the appearance of a real-world poem, Annabel Lee. So this confirms something that I've suspected for a while. I don't think it was confirmed in the first book. If it was, I've forgotten. But certainly in this second book, it has not, I think, been as explicitly confirmed as the citation of Annabel Lee confirms it. Which is that this is not a Star Wars situation. This is not a fully fictional sci-fi setting. Humanity in this setting is our humanity from Earth, from our Earth, with our real-world history, and then at some point in the future, things happen and this setting is created from it. I kind of guessed this from stuff like Canaan House being called Canaan House, and obviously references to Eden and stuff like that. But these are biblical terms, and you often get biblical terms cropping up in fantasy and science fiction without necessarily being references to the actual real life concepts. But Annabel Lee is pretty much confirms it. So this is in fact a more classic science fiction setting than something like Star Wars. What this doesn't answer is something that I am now increasingly wondering about, which is that we know so little about this setting. We know almost nothing about the world outside of the 9 houses. It is, with the story about the Blood of Eden here, it is implied, and in some cases outright stated, that there are other inhabited planets, that John goes out to those planets, and that sometimes the Blood of Eden will turn the population of those planets against the Empire. And John refers to them as insurgents. So is John's empire settling these planets or conquering them? Are the people who live on are first of all, are humans the only sapient species in this setting? Are there aliens? Is a good question to ask. Um, so are all the citizens of the empire human? If they are they all people who were settled on those planets by the empire as the empire expanded and essentially colonized uninhabited planets? Or is John going to planets where humans or some other species already lives and conquering them and colonizing them and incorporating them into the empire? These are all very unclear things right now. Um, there's a horrifying implication in a scene here towards the end where John talks about the the way that he would send lictors to convert thalergenic planets to thanergetic ones, and it's not stated outright, but he also mentions that now that the lictors are busy, sometimes the cohort, like soldiers, will go down to the planet and do this conversion. And it's possible I've misinterpreted this, but the way I understood that is that they just go down there and start killing the local life until there's enough thanergy to begin the process of planetary conversion. Which is existentially terrifying if the life is not sapient, but is also genocide if the life is sapient. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling right now, but I am waiting for the other shoe to drop about this setting, because I feel like there is something deeply, deeply upsetting about the existence of this empire, of this state that John is the leader of, and that we haven't really seen that deeply upsetting thing yet. And I think it might be something that Harrow and all the other characters just know instinctively from living in this world, and I don't think it's a secret. I think it's something that just hasn't come up yet for us, the readers, to realize. I'm waiting to have this horrifying realization about the nature of this setting that I somehow feel is coming. I feel like I have the sword of Damocles hanging over my head, narratively speaking, and I'm just waiting for it to fall. I could be completely wrong. There could be nothing super messed up about the setting, but I feel like there is, and I'm waiting to find out. For a start, I'm waiting to find out who the hell the cohort is fighting. Why does this world even have a military? We don't have any evidence of other states, of other nations, of other governments, of other factions, really, other than the Blood of Eden. And we don't know anything about the Blood of Eden. So, yeah, there's something, there's some messed up imperialism shit happening here that we just aren't privy to yet, I suspect. Yeah. But yeah, that's sort of one of the big one of the big things I'm waiting to find out more about. I'm also waiting to find out what happened to Earth now that I know that this is a universe where Earth exists. So my initial assumption when reading Gideon, just because there's 9 houses, my initial assumption was that the 9 houses, i.e. the Dominicus system, was actually our solar system, the Sol system. But that's kind of weak evidence to assume that, especially since, officially there's 8 planets, not 9, and yada yada yada, but that would mean that Canaan House is on Mercury, which is... I feel like Mercury is not quite that, wet. And it would also mean that at least 2 of the houses are on gas giants, and the 3rd house would be Earth. I don't know. If the Dominicus system is our solar system, then clearly some major changes have occurred there since it's looked like it looks now. And if it's not our solar system, that begs the question: where is our solar system? Where is Earth? What's going on here? Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, I mentioned earlier being confused about one particular element of the plot, and that is the order of events. So the final chapter of this section, the chapter which talks about, let me just find it here, the final multiple chapters of this section, not singular chapter, the final like 4 or 5 chapters, which talk about Ortus the First trying to kill HARROW. At the start of chapter 19, there is the label 10 months before the Emperor's murder. And that doesn't work. And the reason that doesn't work, as far as I can tell, is that most of Act 1 happened 9 months before the Emperor's murder. So this would have to be occurring before Act 1. But the events in these chapters take place on board the Mithraeum, whereas all of Act 1 takes place before HARROW ever arrives at the Mithraeum. Yeah, I don't know what to make of this. It's very either I missed something about the timeline in Act 1, and those 9 months were actually referring to some point after most of the events of Act 1, or I'm missing something about what this 10 months label is referring to, or there's something I don't know about yet, or it's just a mistake. I don't know, it could be a lot of things. I'm just confused by those 2 labels and their temporal relationship to each other. Yeah. That being said, though, let's talk about some of the stuff that I'm confused about in a good way. By which I mean that I'm meant to be confused about because it's the main plot. So, let's just go over a list quickly. Why does quote unquote Ortus the First, Gideon the First, want to kill HARROW? John says it's because he's sworn to some higher power, higher than John, to protect John, and he believes that HARROW is a danger to John. So, who did he swear to? Why does he think she's a threat? Those are things to keep on the lookout for going forward. Number 2, is someone animating Cytherea's corpse? Or is she somehow still alive, and that's how she keeps moving about? I believe Mercymorn and Augustine both deny being the ones moving her corpse around. The likeliest option, in my opinion, I actually have a theory about Cytherea's corpse, is that it's actually HARROW doing it, just not consciously. We've established here that HARROW does stuff she's not fully aware of. She sometimes, especially when it comes to Cytherea, she found herself stabbing Cytherea with a sword once, and she doesn't remember going there. So I think it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that HARROW is actually reanimating Cytherea's corpse and sending it after herself for some reason. We still don't really know what HARROW's... Well, we know we know what's going on in the mind of our current HARROW, but we don't know what the goal of HARROW was when she erased her memories and wrote all those letters to herself. So maybe whatever is going on with Cytherea is part of that plan, if I'm right, and HARROW is the one actually animating her. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Cytherea moving around, other than to say that right now I am fairly confident that it is in fact HARROW animating her. Just, not consciously. What else have we got here? Well, obviously we have the continuation of the flashbacks. Well, quote-unquote flashbacks. Obviously they take place in a version of history that is not real. And the way those particular chapters are revealing stuff is really interesting to me. In particular, what's interesting to me is the way that history has been changed. Because I feel like a lot of the changes actually have nothing to do with Ortis being there instead of Gideon. They're just kind of arbitrary. Like the second house necromancer and then the sixth house pair being the first to die. Instead of, I believe it was Protesilaus and the fifth house couple who died in Gideon. Yeah, it's I feel like these changes are not being done necessarily just to show like the influence of Gideon not being in the story. I feel like they're also kind of a covert way for Tamsin Muir to flesh out some of the characters and relationships from the first book that she never got around to. Because I can't help but notice that, in particular, the flashbacks have a lot of focus on the fifth house pair. Magnus and Abigail, I believe is his wife's name. Yes, Abigail Pent. Yeah, Magnus and Abigail. They're one of the first who died in the first book, and as a result, they barely got any development. Like, they were just a fairly underdeveloped pair of characters who were mostly just there to be the first victims. And I can't remember if they were the first victims or among the first victims, but they were very early on from what I remember. And Gideon didn't interact with them a ton. And they weren't super developed. So here we're getting some development from them. Then we're getting some development for Protesilaus, who again, we never really even met, I think, if I remember correctly, Protesilaus in the first book, because right from the start he was actually just a zombie, which I'm not sure why he isn't one here, because he's definitely like way more animated and way more personable in HARROW's flashbacks. I'm wondering if that's just HARROW projecting backwards, like her assumptions about these people, because of course this isn't genuine as far as we can tell. Right now, as far as we can tell, this entire history where Ortis was her cavalier didn't happen. It's just a fiction she created inside her head. At least that's my assumption so far. So if that's true, and it does seem to be true because when she calls Ortis the First, Mercymorn is like, who? So obviously, I'm pretty sure every other character in the story does know about Gideon, maybe? It's hard to tell right now. But yeah, I wonder how much of the extra insight we are getting into some of these characters from the first book is actual genuine insight that would actually be applicable to the actual people, and how much of it is just HARROW's brain filling in empty spots in her memory. Because of course she probably, like, if this is genuine, like if, for example, the fact that Protesilaus likes to quote epic poetry is a genuine fact about the real life, the real man, Protesilaus, HARROW wouldn't know that because she never met him. She just met a zombie. Right? It's this makes my head hurt thinking about the mechanics of these flashbacks and which elements of them are at all based in reality is really interesting. Speaking of the flashbacks, the sleeper, who is a figure who, from what I can remember, was not in the first book at all, is maybe Gideon, because the sleeper has Gideon's sword, I think. So maybe the sleeper is some kind of metaphorical communication from HARROW's subconscious to herself about Gideon, or something. The body also explicitly references Gideon. HARROW asks the body, "Are my eyes my own?" or something like that, because when you're a lictor, you supposedly get your cavalier's eyes. And HARROW can't remember whether her eyes used to look any different than they do now, and so she asks the body, "Are my eyes my own?" And the body says, "She asked me not to tell you. She asked me not to tell you. Is she Gideon? I suspect so." I don't know what that means, but I suspect that she is Gideon. And one reason to suspect that is that as soon as the body says this, HARROW wakes up screaming. And we've seen so far that explicit references to Gideon, such as whenever John refers to Gideon and HARROW hears Ortis instead, that there's like a really strong sort of physiological reaction from HARROW to any reference to Gideon. Like her brain and body both recoil from the truth. Which I do think might be what happened here. I think that "she asked me not to tell you" was a reference to Gideon, and that sort of like triggered HARROW's strong response. Speaking of which, HARROW can't use Gideon the way that the other lictors can use their cavaliers. And I see two explanations for this. Either HARROW did something different with Gideon's soul than what the others did with their cavaliers. Or, and I think this is more likely, she can't use Gideon until she fully acknowledges that it is in fact Gideon and not Ortis. Like, in order to be able to be unaware of Gideon's existence and fully replace Gideon with Ortis in her mind, HARROW has essentially cut off the part of herself that is Gideon. Maybe? This book makes me feel like I'm rambling completely incoherent nonsense sometimes. While I'm reading the book, I feel like I'm following and like I get everything, and then I start talking about it and I'm like, oh my god, what is happening here? Yeah, I'm gonna end on a note of extreme praise, which is that I am absolutely obsessed with what this story is doing structurally. Specifically, it is structured for all intents and purposes like, like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, like a movie where, like, oh, it's like the whole point of the movie is that there's going to be a twist at the end that, like, recontextualizes everything about the entire story. Except in this case, we know the twist going in. Like, the twist that's going to recontextualize the entire story is that Gideon existed and was HARROW's cavalier instead of Ortis. Like, you can imagine a version of this story that came out before the first book, like a timeline where Harrow was released before Gideon. And so there's this like moment, presumably later on in this book, when Harrow finally remembers Gideon. And if the first book didn't exist in that universe, then this book, when that happened, it would be like this massive reveal of like, oh my god, everything you thought you knew about the main character's backstory has been a lie. There was a secret other character you never knew existed. So yeah, the book is very much structured like it's setting up that kind of twist, except we know the twist going in. And so as a result, instead of the twist itself being what keeps you interested in the story, what keeps you interested is the false reality. Like, you know the truth, but you're fascinated, at least I am, fascinated reading about the ways in which the truth has been distorted. I don't know if I'm getting across what I mean here, but it's like the opposite of a plot twist, but handled really, really well and deftly so far. Yeah. Yeah, I have so many. I cannot put into words most of the thoughts I have about this book and what it's doing, like narratively and structurally and thematically. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna go read Act 3, see where that takes us. Uh, this is probably my least coherent video ever, and I feel like that's fitting considering what I'm reading. So see you all next week when I hopefully have some more answers. Bye.